Bom dia. Estou muito feliz por estar aqui hoje. Was that good? Okay. That was the part I was most nervous about today. So thank you for responding favorably to that. So we've heard a lot about home visiting already, and we're going to hear more this afternoon. And a good place to start is just to refresh your memory about what some of the core content areas are for home visitation. So, if you look at different home visiting program models, they're slightly different. They also have slightly different goals. But generally speaking, you'll see these four content areas be the same across models. Preparation for childbirth and having a young child in the home, provision of emotional and tangible support, discussion of infant and young child development, and addressing social and health needs, including the psychosocial risks of mental health, intimate partner, and substance use. Some of us who do work around psychosocial risks call these three things, poor mental health, intimate partner violence, and substance abuse, the big three. The big three in terms of risk factors that we need to think about as we're dealing with home visitation programs. So why do home visiting programs need to address families' psychosocial risks? There's a few reasons. First of all, most program eligibility requirements include these factors. So you need to have one or more of these risk factors to even get into a home visiting program. Second, we've heard some presentations already yesterday. Colleagues from Peru, colleagues from Chile talked about the high prevalence of psychosocial risks among home visiting clients. Certainly there's variability, but generally speaking, you see high prevalence of these psychosocial risks in many home visiting programs. Third, we know that these psychosocial risks are associated with poor birth outcomes, child abuse and neglect outcomes, and school readiness outcomes, the very outcomes that home visiting programs aim to impact. And fourth, psychosocial risks interfere with home visiting program delivery. For example, you may not be able to effectively communicate information to a home visiting client if there is an abusive partner in the house. You may have difficulty communicating information with a home visiting client if she's agitated or lethargic because she's depressed. So there's some very significant reasons that we should be considering addressing these psychosocial risk factors. What I'm going to talk to you about today, given the importance of addressing psychosocial risk factors, are what the research tells us about home visiting programs addressing psychosocial risks. And so I'm going to talk about three main issues today. And as I talk about these issues, I'm going to try to provide some practical recommendations to home visiting programs on how they can address these issues. We obviously don't have time to go into a detailed discussion of the recommendations, but the idea is to try to give you some thoughts, to try to give you some recommendations on the considerations that you need to have if you are working to address these psychosocial risks. So the three areas that I'll be talking about today are first, the fact that home visiting programs often have difficulty identifying women with psychosocial risk factors. Second, home visitors typically do not feel adequately trained or supervised to address psychosocial risk factors. And third, there's ineffective relationships between home visiting programs and health and social service agencies, which can impede the receipt of effective and timely services to address psychosocial risks. So the first issue is the identification of psychosocial risks. We know that many home visiting programs do screen for some of these risks. But many programs do not screen for all of them. Many programs do not screen for them systematically. And many programs do not screen for them systematically using effective, validated screening tools. The second issue is home visitors may not have time or skills to detect psychosocial risks if not systematically assessed at the time of enrollment. So that's sort of setting the stage for what's going on. And now let's move into some concrete recommendations on what home visiting programs may be able to do to help with identification of psychosocial risks. So the first is to screen every newly enrolling home visiting participant for depression, intimate partner violence, and substance abuse. We know that there are reliable, valid, and brief screening tools that are available. The most commonly used tools are validated for use with Spanish-speaking populations. What I've given you at the bottom here are 3 very nice review articles that have been published fairly recently that give you an overview of different screening tools for each of these areas. So Rhonda Boyd and her colleagues have done a nice review on depression screening tools. There's a recent review in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine on screening for intimate partner violence, and also a recent review by Burns and colleagues on screening for substance abuse. Now, if you are screening for these psychosocial risk factors, there are issues that are involved and considerations that are involved. And I'm going to touch on a couple of them. First is, well, when is the screening conducted? You know, you'll need to think about that. Is screening conducted only at the time of enrollment, or is it done on an ongoing basis? The second is, who's conducting the screening? Is it the intake assessment worker? Is it the home visitor? Is it some combination? And perhaps more importantly, most importantly, is the last issue. What is the protocol for following through on positive screens? If there's one takeaway message, if there's one thing that you take from what I'm going to say today, is you can't screen without follow-up. It's unethical. So you need to make sure that there is a protocol in place for following through on positive screens. So will there be further screening that's done? Who would be doing the further screening? Is there a clinical supervisor who is at the home visiting program who can do that further screening and assessment? And then, you know, the bottom point, you know, are there appropriate services available on-site or via referral? So if you detect that somebody is depressed, if you detect that somebody is in an abusive relationship, you know, are there referral sources either on-site at your home visiting program or off-site where you can refer women? So again, with this issue of identifying psychosocial risks, another recommendation is you need to make clear to the home visiting client how screening and detection of psychosocial risks is related to improving her ability to have a healthy delivery and raise a healthy baby. If you don't explain why you're asking these 2 or 9 or 12 questions about depression, about an abusive relationship, about substance abuse, it's likely to be seen as very intrusive. It's likely to be seen as you know, why are you bothering me with these questions? So there needs to be an explanation for why you're doing the screening. And in my experience and the experience of others, you know, one of the most effective ways of introducing screening to women is to really couch it in terms of we're doing these screenings because we want you to benefit as much as possible from your engagement, from your enrollment in this home visiting program. And the way that we're going to make sure that you benefit the most is we need to detect what is going on, you know, related to mental health, related to partner violence, related to substance use. Second issue, home visitor training and supervision. We've heard a fair amount of discussion about training and supervision already. And I think that that's good, and I think that that's really important. And I think that the fact that you are hearing this from multiple people today and yesterday signifies the importance of this issue for home visitation programs. And there's 2 points that I want to talk about. First is that home visitors are often unclear about their specific role or roles in addressing psychosocial risks. And the second is that existing training and supervision models may be limited in their effectiveness pertaining to addressing psychosocial risks. So I want to describe very briefly a study that we did a few years ago that we did with paraprofessional home visitors in Baltimore, Maryland, where I'm based. And focus groups were conducted with a number of home visitors who had been working for a short period of time and a long period of time at their home visiting programs. And we asked them about addressing all 3 of these psychosocial risks in the context of their work. And what we heard was a lot of very interesting information, and really 3 main themes emerged from these focus groups. The first is that home visitors desired more training on when and how to initiate conversations about mental health partner violence, and substance abuse. When you heard the home visitors talking about these risk factors, they said, we know we're supposed to be addressing them, but we're not quite sure when, we're not quite sure how. There was a lot of uncertainty about what their specific role was in addressing these risk factors. The second is that home visitors felt that their training was largely knowledge acquisition, not skill development. So they said, yeah, we know what the symptoms of depression are. We know what the signs of partner violence may be. That's knowledge acquisition. But we don't know what to do to start engaging in discussions. We don't know how to actually start the conversation and engage in conversation about these psychosocial risk factors. So there needs to be skill development for the home visitors in terms of how to address these risk factors, not just giving them knowledge on substance abuse is this, depressive symptoms look like this. And third, home visitors experience considerable tension between addressing families' more pressing needs, and in Baltimore, the two needs that were most commonly addressed were housing and utilities. So if you think about a hierarchy of needs, I mean, these are very significant needs. You need to have stable housing. You need to have your electricity on. You need to have your water on. So I don't want to downplay the importance of addressing these pressing needs, but what the home visitors said was, we don't know what to do when a client is really dominating the conversation with these pressing needs around housing and utilities. We don't know how to transition the conversation to talking about these psychosocial risks that we believe we need to be covering during our home visit. Another study more recently conducted did focus groups with home visitors to determine barriers and facilitators for implementing intimate partner violence assessments and interventions. And the reason that I'm putting this up here is these findings are very similar to what we found a few years ago. And the main barrier to addressing IPV that this study found was that there was a lack of knowledge, again, among home visitors on when and how to address IPV, which caused considerable stress and anxiety among home visitors. So, what are the recommendations for training and supervision? First, you need to be explicit in defining when and how mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence are to be addressed, and ensure that home visitors understand their roles and responsibilities. We heard a very nice presentation yesterday that really talked about program models and needing to be explicit. So there's really two issues here. One is that the program model needs to be clear. The program model needs to specify what are you supposed to do related to mental health, domestic violence, substance use. And then the second issue is the home visitors need to know what that model is saying, right? So there's the two issues at play. Second recommendation, we need to acknowledge and address home visitors' attitudes and beliefs towards psychosocial risks. And I think that this is particularly true for paraprofessionals. Paraprofessionals are largely from the community. They may have similar experience, attitudes around these psychosocial risks as their clients. For example, do paraprofessional home visitors have stigma around discussing mental health? In my experience, and I think in others' experience, the answer is yes. And I think that we need to acknowledge that that's the case. A third recommendation for home visiting programs is to provide skills on balancing family-identified needs, things like housing, things like utilities, with services to motivate families to recognize and address psychosocial issues that impair effective parenting. And then the final recommendation, and again, you've heard a little bit about this from some of the previous presentations, is that there needs to be initial and ongoing training and supervision to develop and maintain staff skills in addressing these psychosocial risks, and to also assure that these skills are used. Role-playing, simulated or mock clients, reflective supervision, coaching. These are all approaches that I think we need to be considering in terms of working with home visitors. Third issue, home visiting programs' relationships with health and social service agencies. Many home visiting programs don't have established protocols for monitoring clients' receipt of psychosocial risk services once clients are referred to the health or social service agency. So you make a referral, to a community mental health agency. You make a referral to a substance abuse agency. But then what? What happens? What's the role for the home visitor? What's the role for the home visiting program? There needs to be some clear expectations on what is done on both ends. And the other point here is that home visitors actually may not think that highly of different referral sources. And I just want to highlight a very, very modest, small study that we did. We asked home visitors a number of things related to their perceptions of different community agencies. And when we asked home visitors to rate the service quality of different types of community agencies, so some examples are emergency services, parenting education services, prenatal care services. I think altogether we asked about 12 different types of services. You see that domestic violence, mental health, and substance abuse were actually at the bottom in terms of the percent who rated the service quality excellent or good. So why would home visitors refer their clients who they want to establish trust and rapport with? They want to be advocates for their clients. Why would they refer clients to agencies that they don't feel are going to take care of their clients? So I think that that's a very real issue as well. So a couple of recommendations in terms of home visiting programs' relationships with health and social service agencies. The first is, I think there needs to be more systematic monitoring of client referrals. And I'll just give one example. One of the states in the US, the state of Ohio, has developed a program called the Help Me Grow Home Visiting Program. And what they do as part of this program is they administer a well-known, well-validated depression screening tool, the Edinburgh. They then have the Edinburgh score entered into a web-based system. And if you score above the established cutoff, a 12 or a greater, on the Edinburgh, this web-based system is going to prompt the home visitor to make a referral when they see that that screen is a positive screen. This web-based system can email the Edinburgh and demographic information directly to the mental health agency, and obviously there needs to be relationships formed with those mental health agencies. And then there's also a web-based system that prompts the home visitor to contact the mental health agency at 30 days and 90 days post-referral to see if that appointment was made and kept. So it's systematizing this process of making the referrals and following up on the referrals. Now, many programs may do this well already, but in my experience, and I think the experience of others, there's a lot of slippage. There isn't always this systematic follow-up on the part of home visiting programs. And this is one way that we can actually integrate the use of technology into doing some of the referral and monitoring. A second recommendation, and we've heard from a couple of our presenters already that, hey, home visiting programs are not particularly good in and of themselves, given their current structure, given their current models in terms of addressing these psychosocial risk factors. So maybe another approach is we need to augment the home visiting programs. We need to actually embed interventions into home visiting programs that can address substance abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. 3 examples. We're very proud of some of the work that we've been doing the last couple years around embedding a depression prevention intervention into home visiting programs in Baltimore City. The name of our intervention is Mothers and Babies. Actually, the original name is Mamás y Bebés. It was developed for Spanish-speaking women in San Francisco, and we have adapted it for use with women in Baltimore City. There's also very, very good work that's being done by Bob Ammerman around doing in-home cognitive behavioral therapy to treat women who are already clinically depressed. And there's also some very strong work that's being done by some of my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, Phyllis Sharps, and others around a domestic violence enhanced home visitation program. So those are just 3 examples. There are other examples of people who are working on augmenting home visiting programs. But these are 3 examples. And just very briefly, to give you a flavor of one of them, our Mothers and Babies, our Mamas and Bebés intervention in Baltimore City. What we did was a small randomized control trial. We had a control group that received usual home visiting services and received postpartum depression information. And then our intervention group received a 6-week intervention delivered in a group format. And I'm emphasizing group because I think that there is value. I think that there is power in doing something group-based. I understand that home visitation is one-on-one in the home, but I think this idea of doing a group-based intervention where women can meet other women and get support from other women is very powerful. So it's a group intervention, group-based format, delivered by a licensed clinical social worker or a psychologist. And the intervention is divided into 3 2-session modules that map onto core cognitive behavioral concepts, trying to increase the number of pleasant activities that you do. So for example, our population in Baltimore, very, very highly stressed, very, very poor population. They don't have a lot of money to do some of the pleasant activities that many of us in the room may have. So even small things like taking a bath, reading a book, painting your nails. These are the types of pleasant activities that we can teach clients to do as a way of improving their mood. So that's pleasant activities. Changing thought patterns. Can you reduce harmful thought patterns and increase helpful thought patterns as a way of improving your mood? And then finally, trying to increase the contact with others. We heard a little bit yesterday about this idea of social isolation. A lot of clients in home visiting programs may come to home visiting programs isolated. And one of the things that we try to teach during this intervention is, well, how can you ask for support from other people, whether it's other people in this group, other people in the home visiting program, or other people in the community as a way of trying to get social support. One of the innovations that we did in Baltimore, which I think is very important and I think speaks to the reason that we tried to do the mothers and babies intervention within the context of home visitation, is between the 6 weekly group sessions, we had the home visitors reinforce the key points from the intervention sessions and to also encourage women to do their personal projects or their homework that we're talking about, the key concepts that were just discussed in the group. And in that way, it's a group-based intervention, and it's also encouraging the home visitors to be part of this and to do reinforcement of the material. And the last point I think is very important. We did provide transportation, we did provide childcare, we did provide a small meal. These are very important things to get women to come to the intervention sessions. It's a cost, but we think it's important. And one of the things that we are about to start this fall is to actually do another study of mothers and babies, but instead of having clinicians lead the groups, to actually train home visitors to lead the groups. The idea being that home visitors are already paid for, and instead of paying for a clinician to come in and lead the groups, is it possible for home visitors to be trained to deliver this intervention? And if that's the case, this might be a more sustainable approach over time. So just some closing thoughts before we move to the next presenter. Psychosocial risks are common among home visiting clients. We need to be considering them. And I think you've heard that from me and others the last couple of days. The second point is important. Home visiting programs do not ignore. I don't want to stand up here and make it sound like home visiting programs are intentionally avoiding or ignoring these issues. They're not. I think that they recognize them, and they recognize how difficult they are to address them. So programs are not ignoring or avoiding them, but what they need are strategies around screening, referral, training, and intervention. And that's what I've tried to do the last few minutes, is to give some concrete recommendations on what that may look like. I think it's also important to think about home visiting as an opportunity, as a setting where we actually can address these psychosocial risks. So instead of saying, oh my God, these are really, really challenging things to address, we don't want to deal with them, we know that women are coming to home visiting programs. In many cases, women trust their home visitors quite a bit. And so there is the opportunity for us, if home visitors are establishing these trusting relationships with their clients, to use home visiting as a way, as a setting, where we can address these psychosocial risks. And then finally, I think that this is very important. A lot of the work that I do is done in a participatory spirit where we involve not just researchers, but clients, staff, supervisors, funders, policymakers in design and implementing the work. And I think that as any of you are taking some of these ideas or other ideas to your home visiting programs and start thinking about how these could be implemented, it needs to be done in a collaborative fashion where you're getting the buy-in from the staff, from the supervisors, from the folks on the ground doing home visitation. So I thank you very much for the